Word has spread through the great alliances that the quiet days are ending. After defeating the mysterious Meng Dong, claiming 20 Heavenly Venerable Seals, and mending his 14th Seal into a fearsome 5th-grade treasure, Ling Han now faces an even greater opportunity. A primitive dimension hidden within the void, where Heavenly Venerable Stone mines conceal divine medicines, precious metals, and priceless seals. Yet wherever treasure gathers, greed follows, and the peaceful mining camps may soon become the battlefield of an age. Someone has been arguing over raw stones at the pavilion door again, so I assume my favorite wandering cultivators have finally found their way home. Come inside before anyone wagers away another divine metal ingot. The tea is hot, the rumor merchants are loud, and tonight's tale involves exactly the sort of treasure that makes respectable Heavenly Venerates forget their manners. Our old story hall has missed this particular kind of trouble. Meng Dong's gaze swept across the gathering before settling on Zhuang Bi. A faint smile rested on his face, but beneath that easy expression was the confidence of a man who had already measured the distance between himself and those standing above him.
You are a peak stage 4th tier. For now, I am no match for you.
His words were perfectly truthful, yet they landed in Zhuang Bi's ears like a challenge. That tiny phrase, for now, carried an implication impossible to miss. Meng Dong was saying that the gap between them was temporary. For a 4th-tier Heavenly Venerate to hear such confidence from a mere 2nd tier was naturally infuriating. Yet cultivation cared little for wounded pride. Meng Dong's battle prowess was already so monstrous that although Zhuang Bi could defeat him, seriously injuring him would be another matter entirely. Strength gave Meng Dong the right to be arrogant. A 3rd-tier Heavenly Venerate finally stepped forward, unable to ignore the provocation any longer.
Meng Dong, were your earlier words serious?
Of course.
There was no hesitation in that answer. The 3rd-tier expert strode out.
All right. Count me in.
Another followed, then another. One after another, 3rd-tier Heavenly Venerates emerged from the crowd until 10 stood together, each prepared to gamble both pride and Heavenly Venerable Seals against Meng Dong.
Very good.
Meng Dong produced 10 stone slabs. Each contained a Heavenly Venerable Seal that had been severed and sealed within. With almost careless ease, he tossed all 10 toward Zhuang Bi. The 10 challengers likewise severed a Heavenly Venerable Seal from their minds, sealing each one into a special stone before entrusting them to Zhuang Bi. If they won, each would gain 1 seal. If they lost, every one of their 10 seals would become Meng Dong's spoils. For Heavenly Venerates, these were no ordinary wagers. A Heavenly Venerable Seal could directly affect combat potential. Severing one was therefore not merely placing treasure on the table, it meant gambling a fragment of one's hard-earned foundation.
Begin.
10 3rd-tier Heavenly Venerates attacked at once. Divine power surged, secret techniques erupted, and the surrounding space trembled beneath their combined offensive. Yet almost immediately, shock spread across their faces. Meng Dong was stronger than they had imagined, far stronger. From the opening exchange, he seized absolute control of the battlefield. The 10 Heavenly Venerates resisted desperately. Powerful techniques followed one another like crashing waves, each attack carrying the accumulated comprehension of a 3rd-tier expert. But beneath Meng Dong's overwhelming strength, their combined assault shattered again and again. Numbers could compensate for many things, but not for an enormous difference in true battle prowess. Meng Dong was demonstrating something terrifying. His title of 2nd tier described his cultivation realm, not the level at which he actually fought. The battle ended quickly. One by one, all 10 3rd-tier Heavenly Venerates were defeated.
Thanks.
His smile only made the defeat more bitter. The 10 experts could say nothing. 10 3rd tiers had joined hands against 1 2nd tier, and still lost. Silence answered him. Even among 4th tiers, there were not many capable of suppressing Meng Dong, and everyone understood that he would never foolishly accept a challenge from one of the truly overwhelming elites. Silence answered him. Even among fourth tiers, there were not many capable of suppressing Meng Dong, and everyone understood that he would never foolishly accept a challenge from one of the truly overwhelming elites.
However, if no one wants to fight, there'll be no reason for me to come next time.
He shook his head and looked over the gathered Heavenly Venerates with undisguised contempt. Every person present had once been a supreme genius of their generation. Yet now Meng Dong treated them as though their glorious histories meant nothing.
I'm not trying to look down on you. You people really are a bunch of trash.
Laughter rang out as Meng Dong turned to leave. But before he could stride away, another voice cut cleanly through the silence. Meng Dong turned. The instant he recognized Ling Han's cultivation, genuine surprise flickered across his face. Meng Dong turned. The instant he recognized Ling Han's cultivation, genuine surprise flickered across his face.
A second tier, haha. Is your confidence soaring beyond the heavens, or did a donkey kick you in the head?
Ling Han remained completely calm.
Aren't you a second tier too?
Until now, Ling Han had remained silent because his attention had been focused on comprehending the 15 Heavenly Venerable Seals he possessed. But if he intended to fight Meng Dong, he would have to sever some seals for the wager anyway. Continuing to labor over them beforehand was unnecessary. Meng Dong laughed again.
That's right. I am a second tier. But did you not see what just happened? Even 10 third tiers together couldn't defeat me.
I saw. That's precisely why I think you might qualify to be my opponent.
Meng Dong's eyes narrowed. No heavenly venerate who had climbed to such heights could truly be a fool. Ling Han had watched Meng Dong crush 10 third tiers and still issued his challenge without hesitation. That alone told Meng Dong that the man before him was almost certainly another supreme freak of cultivation.
All right, come fight me.
He casually threw out another 10 stone slabs containing Heavenly Venerable Seals. Ling Han answered by producing 10 stone slabs of his own. Ling Han answered by producing 10 stone slabs of his own.
There's no need for me to take advantage of you. 10 against 10.
A wave of astonishment passed through the spectators. Some admired his confidence. Others secretly wondered whether he had thrown away a magnificent advantage for the sake of pride. But Ling Han's reasoning was simpler than theirs. He expected to win. If victory was already certain in his heart, whether he risked 1 seal or 10, changed nothing except the size of his reward. That was not generosity. It was absolute confidence in his own strength.
You're very confident.
If a person has no confidence in himself, what meaning is there left?
Meng Dong threw back his head and laughed.
Good. A man should have confidence in himself. Then let's fight.
Both men entrusted their Heavenly Venerable Seals to Zhuang Bi, then rose into the air. 300 meters separated them. But to Heavenly Venerates, such a distance might as well have been nothing. A single strike could cross it before an ordinary cultivator even registered that either man had moved.
I hope you truly possess some strength. Don't disappoint me.
I hope the same of you.
Meng Dong attacked first. His palm descended with terrifying force. Ling Han met it head-on with a fist. Boom! A violent shock wave exploded from the point of impact. Both figures were forced backward through the air, retreating almost the same distance. In that instant, the casual expressions vanished from both men's faces. Their opponent's raw power was not inferior to their own. Ling Han was genuinely stunned. Until now, battling across 2 cultivation levels had been one of the clearest signs of his own monstrous talent. Yet Meng Dong had just proven that Ling Han was not alone. In Ling Han's estimation, Meng Dong's freakish combat talent even surpassed the Empress, because even she could not normally fight while disadvantaged by 2 entire cultivation levels. Meeting someone like this was rare enough to transform an ordinary wager into a confrontation between monsters. Yet Meng Dong was even more shocked. He was already at the peak stage of the second tier. Ling Han, however, had only reached the early stage. If two men produced equal power, while one stood at the peak of the realm and the other had only just entered it, then the implication was obvious. At equal cultivation, Ling Han's foundation would be even more terrifying. Meng Dong immediately understood that, in terms of raw potential, he was slightly inferior. Instead of discouraging him, the realization ignited Meng Dong's fighting spirit.
Interesting.
His eyes burned with excitement. Equal, raw power did not mean equal victory. Heavenly Venerates did not rely on cultivation alone. Secret techniques, Heavenly Venerable Seals, battle experience, and the ability to combine them all could instantly tear open a gap between seemingly equal opponents. This was where the duel truly began. Their first exchange had merely measured the weight of their swords. Now each man would begin revealing the edge. Meng Dong acted decisively. A Heavenly Venerable Seal awakened within him while a secret technique began circulating at the same time. He released a low roar, drew in a long breath, and manipulated the mystical power of heaven and earth. Then that gathered power erupted violently from his mouth. Golden swords, silver spears, halberds, daggers. Countless weapons materialized in a roaring torrent and shot toward Ling Han from every direction. Ling Han's expression immediately darkened. Powerful or not, there was one unavoidable problem with Meng Dong's technique. From Ling Han's perspective, the man was essentially standing across the battlefield and spitting things at him, and that was apparently one insult too many.
Bastard!
Ling Han charged directly into the storm of weapons. Fists of fury erupted from his hands, while the 14th Seal simultaneously amplified his power. 29 times his normal strength exploded forth. Punch after punch smashed through the barrage. Golden blades shattered. Silver spears burst apart. Halberds and daggers dissolved under the overwhelming violence of Ling Han's fists, as he advanced like an unstoppable war god through a storm of steel. Meng Dong's expression changed again. Ling Han's amplified battle prowess was simply too vicious for Meng Dong to meet directly. Recognizing that immediately was itself proof of Meng Dong's combat intelligence. Instead of allowing pride to trap him in a head-on collision, he abandoned the exchange and changed tactics. Meng Dong retreated without hesitation, refusing to collide directly with Ling Han's empowered fists, yet the 10,000 weapons technique never stopped. More golden swords and silver spears poured from his mouth, creating a relentless moving barrage as he widened the distance. Ling Han smashed another wave aside, fury rising together with his momentum.
Spitting at your opponent just to disgust him. I've never seen anyone as shameless as you.
This time, it was Meng Dong's face that darkened. To him, Ling Han's accusation was outrageous. This was not some vulgar trick. It was the 10,000 weapons technique, his own Heavenly Venerate technique, an ultimate art he had personally created. Its great advantage was precisely that Meng Dong did not need to use his hands or legs. He could launch endless weapons while keeping his limbs free for other actions. From a practical combat perspective, the technique was remarkably efficient. Of course, there was one small flaw. When someone repeatedly expelled divine weapons from his mouth, a little saliva inevitably came with them. Meng Dong considered this insignificant. After all, every strand of hair and every drop produced by a Heavenly Venerate could be regarded as precious material. In his own estimation, even his saliva was fragrant and nourishing enough to rival a great herb. Whether Ling Han would ever accept that magnificent explanation was another matter entirely. Somehow, a clash between two freakish second-tier Heavenly Venerates, one capable of overpowering third tiers and the other wielding 29-fold power, had acquired perhaps the strangest source of killing intent imaginable. Now thoroughly infuriated, Meng Dong intensified the 10,000 weapons technique. The barrage grew fiercer, denser, and more relentless, countless divine weapons screaming across the battlefield toward Ling Han. Now thoroughly infuriated, Meng Dong intensified the 10,000 weapons technique. The barrage grew fiercer, denser, and more relentless, countless divine weapons screaming across the battlefield toward Ling Han. And so, the duel that had begun as a wager of Heavenly Venerable Seals transformed into something far more interesting. Two supreme geniuses of the second tier had finally encountered an opponent worthy of forcing out their true methods. Neither had yet revealed everything. And with both pride and 20 Heavenly Venerable Seals hanging in the balance, retreat was the last thing on either man's mind. Meng Dong entered the battlefield with the aggression of a man who had never learned to lower his head, and in truth, he possessed every reason to be arrogant. Though only a second-tier Heavenly Venerate, his battle prowess could already contend with the fourth tier. Across the entire Genesis world, how many monsters of cultivation had ever achieved such a feat? Even legendary prodigies such as Lin Yulian, Xin Chihu, and Wu Haoyang might not have possessed such terrifying strength when they stood at the same level. A genius of this magnitude should have shaken the world long ago. Yet Meng Dong had appeared almost from nowhere, without lineage, history, or reputation. The martial world knew only one name, and even that name might merely have been an alias. But today, that mysterious prodigy had encountered Ling Han. Fists of fury erupted again and again. Ling Han advanced like an unstoppable storm, every punch driving Meng Dong backward. Space trembled beneath their collision, and Meng Dong, despite his monstrous strength, was being forced to retreat continuously.
Charge!
Meng Dong roared furiously. From his mouth, weapon after weapon shot forth without pause, transforming the space before him into a torrent of murderous steel. The power was horrifying. A normal third-tier Heavenly Venerate could have been slain instantly beneath such an assault. Ling Han answered with his fists. One punch. Another punch. Every weapon that reached him shattered beneath overwhelming force, bursting apart before it could wound him. This was no longer merely a contest between two second-tier Heavenly Venerates. Their actual combat strength had long since crossed the boundaries normally imposed by Cultivation Realm. Then Meng Dong finally drew a precious tool. An ancient mirror appeared in his hand. 7 seals flickered across its surface, and in the next instant, a blinding radiance exploded outward. Ling Han immediately shut his eyes. That brilliance was no ordinary light. It carried physical destructive power so intense that even the eyes of a Heavenly Venerate could not gaze directly upon it. Meng Dong seized the opening without hesitation. He surged forward and slammed a palm toward Ling Han's head. Primal chaos descended around him, rolling like ancient mist, making his silhouette resemble a demonic god emerging from the beginning of creation. Yet, the ancient mirror itself was not an offensive Heavenly Venerate tool. It was purely supplementary. That choice revealed Meng Dong's confidence more clearly than any boast could. He did not believe he needed a weapon to increase his killing power. He only needed his opponent deprived of sight, and his own strength would settle everything else. Ling Han released a thunderous battle cry. He still did not draw the Divine Demon Sword. Instead, he clenched his fists and answered Meng Dong head-on with fists of fury. There was a reason for that decision. The Divine Demon Sword allowed Ling Han to pour terrifying raw power into every strike. But Fists of Fury was different. It was a secret technique he himself had created, born from his own comprehension and battle path. Because the technique belonged completely to him, it could draw out his combat potential more efficiently. In this particular clash, his bare fists were actually the sharper weapon. But beneath the mirror's blazing radiance, Ling Han could see nothing. Worse still, his divine sense had also been severed from the battlefield. Sight was gone. Spiritual perception was gone. The ancient mirror had stripped away the two methods a Heavenly Venerate would normally rely upon to perceive an attack. Otherwise, such a supplementary treasure would hardly deserve its rank. And yet Ling Han continued fighting. He abandoned sight. He abandoned divine sense. He entrusted everything to instincts sharpened through countless battles. His skin felt changes in force. His body sensed approaching danger. Before conscious thought could form, his fists were already moving toward the most logical point of interception. Peng, peng, peng. Fist met palm, power collided with power. Neither man held anything back. Every exchange carried the intention to overwhelm the other, and shockwaves rolled through the surroundings as the two monstrous second tiers fought at a level that ordinary Heavenly Venerates could scarcely comprehend. The spectators watched with increasingly complicated expressions. They desperately wanted Meng Dong to suffer a defeat. This mysterious newcomer had been far too domineering. Yet if Ling Han truly defeated him, another terrifying conclusion would become unavoidable. Meng Dong was already a freak beyond common sense. If Ling Han stood even higher, then what exactly did that make Ling Han? Sometimes the martial world does not fear monsters nearly as much as it fears discovering that an even greater monster has been standing nearby all along. But the spectators' thoughts could not influence the battle by even the smallest degree. Little by little, Ling Han gained the upper hand. A sharp light flickered within Meng Dong's eyes. His arrogance remained, but beneath it now lay calculation. A sharp light flickered within Meng Dong's eyes. His arrogance remained, but beneath it now lay calculation. Ling Han merely smiled.
Yet I have overestimated you. Just that bit of strength is not worthy of making you my opponent.
The seals surrounding Meng Dong abruptly vanished. Then 3 seals upon his chest ignited simultaneously. The seals surrounding Meng Dong abruptly vanished. Then 3 seals upon his chest ignited simultaneously. Boom. His battle prowess soared madly. Meng Dong struck out with another palm, and under that terrifying surge of strength, even heaven and earth seemed to tremble.
Combination seals.
That's right. They can boost my battle prowess 32 times.
Pride rang through Meng Dong's declaration. A 32-fold amplification was enough to make countless heavenly venerates despair. Ling Han laughed.
You are not the only one to have mastered combination seals.
The 9th seal that Ling Han had been channeling dispersed. In its place, the 4 direction seals activated together. His power exploded upward, 39 times. This single numerical difference completely changed the balance. Meng Dong had already been slightly weaker before either side revealed their combination seals. His 32-fold amplification was tremendous, but Ling Han's 39-fold boost widened the existing gap instead of closing it. The result became visible almost immediately. What had once been a narrow disadvantage for Meng Dong became unmistakable suppression. Even those watching from the sidelines could see it clearly now. If the battle continued like this, Meng Dong would lose.
Not bad. You are truly not bad. Looks like this powerful move of mine must be used on you.
Meng Dong suddenly extended his right hand toward Ling Han. The hand expanded at a horrifying speed. In the blink of an eye, it seemed no longer like flesh and blood, but a vast fragment of heaven and earth descending from above. Destructive heavenly origin. The enormous hand crashed downward. An indescribable pressure flooded the battlefield, reaching beyond the body and pressing directly upon the soul. Even the surrounding heavenly venerates felt as though something invisible were trying to tear their spirits apart. That was what made the technique truly frightening. Its threat was not merely the strength contained within the giant hand. Before the attack even landed, it assaulted the opponent's mind and spirit, potentially destroying their ability to resist at full strength. Against experts of comparable cultivation, even a moment of spiritual collapse could decide life and death. Ling Han felt it as well. Agony erupted through his consciousness, so violent that for an instant it seemed his head itself would split apart. And then something unexpected happened. A mysterious power suddenly surged from within Ling Han's body. Without warning and without conscious command, it swept through him and completely expelled that terrible spiritual pressure. Ling Han had no time to investigate where that power had come from. The enormous hand was already descending. He punched upward. Peng! The giant hand exploded beneath that single fist. The giant hand exploded beneath that single fist. Meng Dong froze. For the first time, genuine disbelief appeared on his face. He even stopped attacking, as though the failure of that strike had overturned something he had believed to be certain. But only an instant later, realization flashed through his eyes.
So you too are.
Ling Han's brows rose. Those unfinished words were far more unsettling than another attack.
So I too am what? Why don't you finish your words?
Meng Dong nodded slightly, but instead of answering directly, he gave a knowing laugh.
Hey. It is no wonder you do not know, because you have not awakened yet. No rush, no rush. When there comes a day that you understand, there will naturally be no need for me to explain anything.
Ling Han frowned deeply. Awakened? Understand what? Meng Dong's words sounded less like random mystery and more like the language of someone who believed Ling Han belonged to the same hidden category as himself. And just like that, Meng Dong abandoned the battle. He turned and departed without another exchange. With a single step, he crossed 500 kilometers. Meng Dong laughed. Meng Dong laughed. And just like that, Meng Dong abandoned the battle. He turned and departed without another exchange. With a single step, he crossed 500 kilometers. Only after he had already reached the distance did his final words drift back across the battlefield.
I forfeit.
The earlier conversation had been transmitted directly into Ling Han's mind through divine sense. Thus, no one else knew what Meng Dong had revealed. But these final two words were spoken aloud. Everyone heard them. Meng Dong had lost. Everyone heard them. He could still have endured Ling Han's current burst of amplified power, and Heavenly Venerable Seals did not remain active forever. Once Ling Han's advantage changed, who could say what would happen next? Perhaps Meng Dong possessed another seal capable of reversing the situation. That was precisely why his surrender mattered. Meng Dong had not conceded because every path to victory was gone. He had stopped after discovering something about Ling Han. Whatever he had recognized was apparently more important to him than winning this battle. Ling Han remained standing where he was, silent and motionless. His thoughts were no longer on victory. What exactly had Meng Dong meant? From Meng Dong's tone, it almost sounded as though the two of them should have known one another, as though they belonged to some common group or shared some hidden origin. Yet Ling Han was certain he had never encountered Meng Dong before. On that point, he could swear to heaven and earth. And that only made everything stranger. Recently, too many inexplicable things had happened around him. When he broke through to the second tier, his divine sense had somehow entered the void beyond his control. There, impossibly, he had encountered hysteria. Afterward, Ling Han had gained the ability to devour the life essence left behind by a dead Heavenly Venerate, and just moments ago, when destructive heavenly origin attacked his spirit, another mysterious power had risen from inside him and driven that pressure away. Each incident could perhaps be dismissed if viewed alone. Taken together, however, they formed a pattern that Ling Han could no longer ignore. His breakthrough, hysteria, the strange devouring ability, the hidden power within his body, and now Meng Dong's talk of awakening, all seemed to point toward a mystery whose true scale had not yet been revealed. And perhaps the most unsettling possibility was this. Meng Dong seemed to understand at least part of that mystery. The enemy who had just surrendered might possess answers that Ling Han himself did not. Still, Ling Han did not pursue him. Meng Dong's strength was only somewhat inferior to his own. If the man truly intended to leave, Ling Han had no certainty of capturing him, much less forcing answers from him, and Meng Dong had already made his attitude obvious. Until Ling Han supposedly awakened, he had no intention of explaining anything. So Ling Han turned back. Whatever secrets Meng Dong carried could remain unanswered for the moment. there was something much more tangible waiting nearby. The Heavenly Venerable Seals he had won from Zhuangbi. 20 of them. The surrounding Heavenly Venerates watched Ling Han with open envy. 20 Heavenly Venerable Seals represented a fortune capable of making even supreme experts restless. Some among the crowd were already tempted to seize them by force. But temptation was one thing, acting upon it was another. They forcefully suppressed their greed. The rules here could not be casually broken. If victors could simply be robbed after earning their prizes, then who would ever willingly participate in these battles again? For once, order protected Ling Han more effectively than intimidation. Yet after what everyone had just witnessed, it was difficult to say how many people truly respected the rules, and how many simply lacked the courage to test the fists that had defeated Meng Dong. Ling Han sat down at the edge of the battlefield, and immediately began refining all 20 Heavenly Venerable Seals. There was no reason to delay. If left unrefined for too long, the seals would gradually disperse with the passage of time. A treasure already in one's hands was only truly secure once it had become one's own. Meanwhile, the battles continued. With Meng Dong gone, the overwhelming monster who had previously disturbed the balance was finally absent, and the other Heavenly Venerates could once again challenge one another without such oppressive interference. Of course, there was now another problem. Meng Dong's place had effectively been taken by Ling Han. After witnessing a second-tier monster overpower another second-tier monster whose strength could already rival the fourth tier, how many people would still willingly walk forward and challenge Ling Han? The arena had lost one nightmare, only to discover that an even greater one was now sitting quietly at its edge, refining 20 Heavenly Venerable Seals. With Meng Dong gone and no challenger left willing to step forward, Ling Han could only leave the battlefield with an almost exaggerated sense of helplessness. Yet beneath that casual smile, everyone present understood the truth. There simply was no one left worth fighting. Rongyang, meanwhile, was genuinely grateful. Ling Han had solved the enormous problem that was Meng Dong, and with that victory, the old grievances between the Rong clan, Ling Han, and Ling City could finally be laid to rest. Ling Han understood perfectly why the Rong clan had suddenly become so accommodating. His potential had become too terrifying to ignore. An enemy who might one day tower above the world was far more dangerous than an enemy standing before them today. And because the Lin clan stood behind him, crushing Ling Han by force was no longer a simple option. Since they could not kill him now, and since his future strength was impossible to predict, peace became the wiser choice. Better to erase an old feud today than nourish a calamity for tomorrow. Ling Han had no objection. The true culprits behind the conflict, Zhu Heavenly Venerate and Rong Xingquan, were already dead. If the Rong clan wished to replace hostility with friendship, he had no reason to refuse.
When there are more fights in the future, remember to invite me.
Rongyang's expression darkened almost immediately. He could already imagine the consequences. If he brought Ling Han to another gathering like this, the other Heavenly Venerates would probably curse him exactly as Meng Dong had. One Ling Han was enough to ruin far too many people's plans. His words were polite. His decision was absolute. Never again would he willingly invite Ling Han to this kind of event. His words were polite. His decision was absolute. Never again would he willingly invite Ling Han to this kind of event. But Ling Han was not finished.
I may be busy sometimes. If that happens, my wife can go instead.
Rongyang's face became even darker. He had fought the Empress before. Though she was only a second-tier Heavenly Venerate, her strength was already enough to contend with the third tier. She was another monster among monsters. At that moment, Rongyang probably understood a frightening truth. Ling Han's household did not merely contain one troublesome genius. Even the person he offered as a substitute was powerful enough to overturn the balance of an ordinary battle. And so Rongyang sent Ling Han away with all the enthusiasm of a man escorting a walking calamity out of his gates. The farther this cunning fellow stayed from him, the more peaceful his future would probably be. Ling Han returned to Ling City in an excellent mood, at least on the surface. This journey had brought him 20 Heavenly Venerable Seals. By any measure, that was an astonishing harvest. Yet deep inside his heart, a shadow remained. What exactly was happening to his body? Ling Han told no one about that hidden concern. Instead, he entered seclusion and began refining the 20 Heavenly Venerable Seals he had acquired. When the refinement was complete, he discovered that 3 of the seals were duplicates. Without hesitation, he severed those 3 seals from himself once again, and transmitted them to the Empress. That left Ling Han with 35 Heavenly Venerable Seals in total. Unfortunately, every newly acquired unique seal was only 9th grade.
Bunch of cheapskates.
Still, the harvest was far from disappointing. After piecing the seals together, the number of combination seals he possessed rose from 5 to 9. If all 9 were activated simultaneously, they could amplify his power 26-fold, a level equivalent to a 7th grade seal.
Not bad. Not bad at all.
9th grade seals possessed an advantage precisely because they were considered ordinary. Powerful heavenly venerates rarely treasured them as fiercely as higher grade seals, which meant they were more common, easier to encounter, and therefore more realistic to assemble into a complete combination. What others dismissed as scraps could become a terrifying foundation in Ling Han's hands. 9 seals already granted 26 times his normal power. Then what would happen if all 110 seals of that set were gathered? 1,000-fold amplification, 10,000-fold. The thought alone stirred anticipation within Ling Han. Yet collecting them was another matter entirely. If he continued winning every battle, sooner or later everyone would learn the lesson. Who would still willingly step into the arena against him? His thoughts then turned toward a darker road, the path already chosen by many heavenly venerates. Robbery, murder. No rules, no exchanges, no patient comprehension. Kill another heavenly venerate, seize what that person spent countless years cultivating, and turn their hard-earned foundation into one's own strength. For someone like Ling Han, who could refine other heavenly venerates and seize both their cultivation and their seals, the temptation was especially immense. Even Ling Han could not deny how attractive such a shortcut appeared. But one question stopped him. Could strength forcefully stolen from others truly carry him all the way to the pinnacle? A sudden surge in cultivation might look glorious, but borrowed foundations were still borrowed foundations. If hidden instability accumulated beneath that explosive growth, the price might only reveal itself when there was no longer any road back. Ling Han chose patience, one step at a time. Tens of thousands of years passed in seclusion. Ling Han patiently mastered every newly acquired Heavenly Venerable Seal until they were completely integrated into his own system. Only after making them truly his did he emerge again. Outside, the political landscape had already shifted. The Rong clan had formally entered an alliance with the Lin clan. The Ying clan, however, remained undecided. Not because the Lin clan refused them, but because the Ying clan's appetite was simply too great. Their condition was astonishing. They wanted a princess of the Lin clan to marry into the Ying clan. Even Lin Xiaoyang could not decide such a matter. Lin Yulian was Lin Luo's beloved daughter. If she herself refused, who beneath the heavens could force her? When the demand became known, condemnation spread everywhere. To many, the Ying clan's request was shameless beyond measure. Lin Yulian was hailed as the strongest prodigy of eternity. Advancing to the 7th tier was viewed as only a matter of time, and her future heights could be extraordinary. For a sixth-tier force to demand marriage ties with someone expected to become a supreme seventh-tier elite was not merely ambition. In the eyes of outsiders, it looked like an attempt to bind the future of an incomparable genius to political bargaining before her true strength had even blossomed. Thus, negotiations with the Ying clan remained stalled. At the same time, another rumor was finally exposed as false. Lin Piaoxue would not be marrying Rong Yang. Lin Xiaoyang was the son of a seventh-tier heavenly venerate and a sixth-tier himself. Why would someone of his standing sacrifice his own daughter merely to purchase an alliance? The growing coalition was centered upon the Lin clan. With Lin Luo, a seventh-tier heavenly venerate, standing behind it, the alliance naturally came to be known as the Lin Alliance. Strictly speaking, Ling Han and his people were members of the Lin Alliance as well. Yet compared with the monstrous forces gathered beneath that banner, their present contribution appeared almost negligible. Heavenly venerates were still dying across the world, but the bloodshed had begun to slow. Most experts had gathered into alliances, and that changed everything. Two alliances could certainly wage war, but if both sides suffered disastrous losses, a third faction might simply descend afterward and devour the survivors. No supreme expert wished to fight a glorious war only to hand the final victory to someone who had remained safely on the sidelines. For that reason, large-scale conflicts between alliances became rare. Slowly, strangely, the world began showing signs of peace. But the martial world had always moved in cycles. Chaos gave birth to peace, and peace eventually became the soil from which new chaos emerged. With no urgent battle demanding his attention, Ling Han entered another prolonged seclusion. This time, besides cultivating, he focused on one particularly mysterious treasure within himself, the incomplete 14th Heavenly Venerable Seal. Even while damaged, the 14th Seal could already amplify his strength 29-fold. That alone suggested something extraordinary. If restored completely, it might become a high-level 6th-grade seal. Perhaps even a 5th-grade seal. Ling Han continuously communicated with heaven and earth, extracting void particle energy and using it to repair the damaged seal. The process was agonizingly slow, yet it worked. Heavenly Venerable Seals stood above ordinary regulations because their very purpose was to communicate with the fundamental powers of the Genesis world. Since those seals were connected to the deepest framework of existence, using the 6 fundamental powers to mend them was not merely possible. It followed the same underlying principle from which they had been born. Ling Han could not help feeling rueful. If he were already a 7th-tier heavenly venerate, he could extract all 6 elements simultaneously with a casual wave of his hand. Repairing a heavenly venerable seal at that level would be vastly more efficient. Time flowed like an endless celestial river. 700 million years passed. At last, half of the 14th seal had been restored. Its amplification rose from 29 times to 32 times. Another 2 billion years disappeared into cultivation. By then, 3/4 of the seal had been repaired, and its power amplification reached 39 times. 39 times. A single incomplete seal had already caught up to the combined might of the 4 direction seals. That comparison revealed just how frightening the 14th seal truly was. Combination seals relied on multiple individual seals resonating together, yet this one seal, still missing 1/4 of itself, could already stand beside an entire established combination. Ling Han's anticipation grew stronger. If advancing to the 2nd tier had revealed such a seal, then what might happen when he reached the 3rd tier? Would an even more terrifying Heavenly Venerable Seal automatically manifest before him? Then another 4 billion years passed. At last, the final imperfection vanished. The 14th Heavenly Venerable Seal was completely restored. Its amplification surged directly to 47 times. A 5th grade Heavenly Venerable Seal. And if one 5th grade seal could already grant 47 times the power, then the thought of combining several 5th grade seals was enough to make even an experienced Heavenly Venerate's heart race. The true value was not merely 47 times. It was the possibility of a future combination whose amplification might become monstrous beyond calculation. Ling Han suddenly found himself eager to challenge stronger Heavenly Venerates. Yet that enthusiasm quickly met cold reality. At present, Ling Han's battle prowess could only barely contend with a peak stage 4th tier Heavenly Venerate. Against a true 5th tier, there would be no glorious challenge waiting for him, only disaster. There was a vast difference between craving stronger opponents and foolishly delivering oneself into their hands. Ling Han loved battle, but he had never survived this long by confusing courage with recklessness. So he suppressed the urge to go searching for a 5th tier and stepped out of seclusion instead. The world outside had changed again. Who knew had already broken through to the 3rd tier. The Empress had also completely refined the 3 Heavenly Venerable Seals Ling Han had passed to her. But the greatest surprise was waiting beyond both of those developments. His daughter, Ling Shi, had returned. Ling Han was startled. Already? He remembered his own path all too clearly. In the past, he had spent an entire epoch extracting the power of dimension from 999 dimensions, before finally reaching the absolute limit of what that method could accomplish. Only after shattering his core of power had Ling Han broken through that boundary, taking another step and transforming his own body into a model of the Genesis world itself. That desperate transformation had opened an even broader cultivation path before him. That experience was precisely why Ling Shi's return was so shocking. Ling Han knew better than almost anyone how brutally difficult that road should be. He had measured its limits with an entire epoch of cultivation, and then broken those limits through a radical transformation of his own foundation. Yet Ling Shi had cultivated for only around 10 billion years. And somehow, she had already reached the limit. So what exactly had happened during Ling Shi's cultivation? Had she truly reached the same boundary Ling Han once struggled against for an epoch? Or had her path revealed something entirely different? Whatever the answer, her unexpectedly swift return was no ordinary family reunion. It was the beginning of a new mystery. Ling Shi had entered this world beneath circumstances that ordinary cultivators could not even dream of. Before her first cry had ever echoed beneath the heavens, destiny had already placed treasures at her feet. Both of her parents were Heavenly Venerates. Her innate aptitude was extraordinary, and the Empress had carried her for nearly 100 million years, nourishing her with Heavenly Venerable tier power until the moment of birth. Thus, while countless geniuses spent lifetimes struggling upward from mortality, Ling Shi had opened her eyes as a celestial king. And Ling Han had prepared yet another astonishing foundation for his daughter. He had retrieved a small world and implanted it within her body. With it, Ling Shi could temporarily erupt with pseudo-Heavenly Venerable tier battle prowess, while constantly studying the mysterious power of dimension hidden inside that world. Her starting point was so high that even supreme geniuses would have considered it heaven-defying. That was precisely why Ling Han found her sudden return so difficult to understand. With such foundations, 10 billion years should not have been enough to exhaust her path. Ling Han stared at his daughter, disbelief rising in his heart. Had she truly reached the end of her cultivation road already?
Precious daughter, why have you returned so quickly?
Ling Shi's answer came softly, but beneath that gentleness lay a firmness. Ling Han knew all too well. It was the same stubborn resolve that had carried him through countless impossible battles.
Father, I have decided not to follow the path that you and Mother walked.
Ling Han sighed inwardly. He himself had never allowed others to dictate his Tao. How could he now demand that his daughter abandon a path she had chosen with her own heart?
Then what path do you intend to walk?
I want to transform the small world inside my body into a true dimension. I have a feeling that this path will make me stronger than extracting the power of dimension from 10 dimensions, perhaps even more than 100.
Ling Han fell silent. This was no ordinary change in cultivation technique. His daughter was attempting to reshape the very foundation upon which her future power would stand. There was logic behind Ling Shi's choice. The Empress and others cultivated by extracting dimensional power from different dimensions and condensing it into their own cores. Ling Han, however, nurtured dimensions directly within himself, and his resulting foundation was far more terrifying. The difference was not merely quantity, it concerned the source and structure of one's power. Yet Ling Han's road could not simply be copied. His circumstances were unique. If an ordinary cultivator tried to force an entire collection of dimensions into the body as he had done, the most likely outcome would not be supremacy, but self-destruction. Ling Shi was different. The small world had existed within her since the beginning. It could develop gradually alongside her cultivation, transforming step by step into a genuine dimension. From one perspective, such a path even bore a faint resemblance to hysteria. But the true question was no longer whether the path could work. The question was how far Ling Shi could push it. Would her inner dimension remain low level, rise to medium level, become high level, or one day reach the terrifying standard of a transcendent dimension? Each answer represented an entirely different future. For a first-tier Heavenly Venerate to command the power of an entire dimension would already be astonishing, especially if that dimension could continue growing exponentially. Yet even such a road still could not be compared with Ling Han's own body, where what was being nurtured was nothing less than an entire Genesis world. That overwhelming foundation was also Ling Han's burden. Every step he took now required an unimaginable accumulation of power. His progress was painfully slow, and no one could say how many years the next advancement would demand. But whenever he succeeded, the increase in battle prowess would be equally monstrous. Then Ling Han caught himself. This discussion was supposed to be about his daughter, not his own abnormal cultivation. He finally nodded.
This is the road you chose for yourself. Since you have made your decision, then walk it with resolve. Do not waver halfway.
I know.
Ling Shi paused for a moment before adding something else.
Father, there is someone I would like you to meet.
Ling Han's instincts immediately screamed danger. One glance at his daughter's expression was enough. There was a softness there that had nothing to do with cultivation. For a man who had challenged supreme experts without fear, this was an entirely different kind of crisis. Heavenly Venerates could be fought. Enemies could be crushed. But a grown daughter bringing home a young man? Even Ling Han suddenly discovered a battlefield for which cultivation offered very little preparation. In his heart, one thought thundered above all others. Someone was trying to take his precious daughter away.
Fine. Bring the boy here.
Ling Shi hid a small smile and soon returned with a young man. Ling Han's first surprise was the young man's cultivation. He had assumed that anyone capable of drawing Ling Shi's attention would at least be a Heavenly Venerate. Instead, the newcomer possessed strength only comparable to the Immortal Palace tier. In Ling Han's present world, that could scarcely be called powerful.
My name is Fu Tianxing. Greetings, sir.
Fu Tianxing clasped his hands respectfully. His manner was polite, yet he neither groveled nor showed arrogance. There was an unusual steadiness in him. That composure immediately caught Ling Han's attention. Even while deliberately restraining his aura, Ling Han's existence alone placed terrifying pressure on weaker cultivators. Ordinary celestial kings could become tongue-tied before him, much less someone at the immortal palace tier. Yet, Fu Tianqing could still greet him clearly and calmly. That was not strength of cultivation. It was strength of temperament. Ling Han almost approved of him on the spot. Then he remembered one crucial detail. This promising young man was also the fellow who intended to court his daughter. Approval instantly became vigilance. Ling Han questioned Fu Tianqing carefully about his origins and past. The more he learned, the more surprising the answer became. Fu Tianqing had also risen from a small world by opening the sky, an experience strikingly similar to Ling Han's own beginnings. Even more astonishingly, he had needed only several million years to reach the immortal palace tier. For cultivators who understood how merciless the road of advancement could be, several million years to reach such a realm was not merely impressive. It marked Fu Tianqing as a talent whose potential extended far beyond his present cultivation. Ling Shi had clearly not chosen someone ordinary. Then came the blow. Ling Han could not easily refuse. Under Ling Shi's gentle but unmistakably determined suggestion, he accepted Fu Tianqing as his disciple. Inside, Ling Han could only grind his teeth. Had he not just personally invited the wolf into his own home? By making Fu Tianqing his disciple, he had practically made it easier for the young man to remain beside Ling Shi. Yet beneath the father's irritation was an unavoidable truth. Ling Shi had grown up. No matter how strong Ling Han became, he could not imprison his daughter's life inside his own protection forever. And Fu Tianqing soon proved that Ling Shi's judgment had not been misplaced. Once massive cultivation resources were poured into him, his advancement became fierce and relentless. In only 1 million years, he charged into the Celestial King tier. Even Lu Yutong and the other women were astonished by his speed. Fu Tianqing might not possess overwhelmingly handsome features, but his bearing was refined, graceful, and respectful. Before long, the women were treating him almost as though his status as their future son-in-law had already been decided. Ling Han nearly exploded every time he saw it. Another 100 million years slipped past like flowing water. Fu Tianqing had already reached the 9th heaven. Despite beginning far later than Ling Han's other disciples, he had surpassed them, and the Heavenly Venerable tier now stood almost within reach. Judged purely as a prospective son-in-law, Fu Tianqing offered Ling Han very little to criticize. His talent was exceptional, his temperament steady, and his future brilliant. Unfortunately, reason and a father's heart were not always willing to cultivate the same Dao. Whenever Ling Han imagined his precious daughter eventually marrying this brat, the urge to drag Fu Tianqing into a corner and beat him senseless still surfaced with remarkable enthusiasm. But before Ling Han could lose himself in such fatherly grievances, a message arrived from Lin Xiaoyang. The summons was urgent. Ling Han was to come to the Lin clan immediately. Ling Han departed the moment he received it. Upon reaching the Lin clan, he discovered that Zhou Heng and Chu Hao had also been called. The atmosphere was already grave when Lin Xiaoyang revealed the reason for the gathering.
I have just received news. A primitive dimension has appeared within the void.
Zhou Heng and Chu Hao rose almost simultaneously. These were mighty 6th-tier elites, men who had witnessed countless impossible things, yet even they could not hide their shock.
What?
How could that be possible? The void should not be capable of accommodating anything.
Nevertheless, it is true. Father discovered it, and the other 7th-tier lords have independently confirmed the same thing.
That answer ended the argument immediately. If multiple 7th-tier heavenly venerates had verified the phenomenon, disbelief could no longer erase it. The discovery violated one of the most basic understandings of the Genesis world. The void was not supposed to be a place where a normal dimension could exist. Thus, the primitive dimension was dangerous before anyone even knew what treasures it contained. Its very existence was already a mystery capable of overturning accepted knowledge. Ling Han did not linger on the impossibility. His thoughts moved directly to the matter that truly mattered. Lin Xiaoyang gave him an approving glance. Ling Han had once again gone straight to the heart of the matter. Lin Xiaoyang gave him an approving glance. Ling Han had once again gone straight to the heart of the matter.
That dimension contains an enormous quantity of what we call Heavenly Venerable Stone.
Ling Han naturally knew the material. Heavenly Venerable Stone possessed a highly unusual property. It could preserve Heavenly Venerable Seals. Apart from a Heavenly Venerate's own mind, it was apparently the only known substance capable of containing such seals. Yet, Heavenly Venerable Stone alone was hardly enough to make supreme experts risk their lives. Its usefulness was peculiar, but limited.
The Heavenly Venerable Stones we have obtained in our world actually came from that primitive dimension. At certain times, they break free from the dimension's power, appear within the void, and eventually descend into our world.
Lin Xiaoyang continued, each sentence making the strange dimension sound less like a curiosity and more like a treasure vault hidden beyond the boundaries of common sense.
By itself, Heavenly Venerable Stone is not especially useful. Aside from allowing Heavenly Venerable divine sense and techniques to pass through it, it is almost ordinary.
Then his tone grew heavier.
However, Father discovered that some Heavenly Venerable Stones contain ancient relics from that primitive dimension. Among them are young true dragons, supreme medicines, primal chaos, divine metal, and most importantly, Heavenly Venerable Seals.
The expressions of Ling Han, Zhou Heng, and Chu Hao changed together. Now the true value of the primitive dimension stood revealed. A young, true dragon was already an astonishing prize. Supreme medicines and primal chaos divine metal could move great powers, but Heavenly Venerable Seals directly affected the cultivation and battle prowess of Heavenly Venerates themselves. Once such treasures entered the equation, peaceful exploration became almost impossible. A land filled with Heavenly Venerable Stones was no longer merely an unexplored dimension. It was a strategic treasure ground capable of drawing the eyes of the strongest cultivators in the Genesis world.
Then this primitive dimension will become an extremely important strategic location.
Every heavenly venerate will be tempted. Once they begin gathering, their great battles will be unavoidable. Bodies will be scattered again and again.
Zhou Heng's conclusion was cold, but entirely realistic. When resources capable of changing the balance between Heavenly Venerates appeared, morality alone could not restrain ambition. Every seal gained by one faction was a potential increase in strength, and every treasure surrendered to an enemy could become tomorrow's blade at one's throat. Yet while the others considered the coming competition, Ling Han's mind turned toward something even more dangerous. The primitive dimension did not lie within an ordinary corner of the Genesis world. It existed inside the void. And the void was Hysteria's domain. This was the shadow hanging over every treasure they had just discussed. Hysteria could traverse dimensional barriers and move through the void with an advantage no ordinary Heavenly Venerate possessed. Entering that primitive dimension might mean marching directly onto ground, where the greatest enemy in existence held the initiative. Ling Han looked toward Lin Xiaoyang, his expression turning solemn.
The void belongs to Hysteria. It can cross the barriers between dimensions and reign there with unmatched freedom. If we enter this primitive dimension, inside the void want Hysteria attack us.
And with that question, the promise of unimaginable treasure became inseparable from the threat of unimaginable danger. Heavenly Venerable Seals might be waiting in that ancient dimension, but so might a battlefield where even the strongest experts could discover that they were no longer the hunters. The Void was no stranger to Ling Han. More than once he had crossed paths with Hysteria in that boundless darkness, and every encounter had taught him the same lesson. Nothing connected to that monstrous existence could ever be treated casually. Once bitten, twice shy. Even with his present strength, Ling Han refused to lower his guard. Lin Xiaoyang nodded, his expression calm despite the danger hidden beyond the dimensional walls.
The Void is indeed Hysteria's territory. However, its main body is presently locked in an intense battle with Father and the others. What it can mobilize against us should only be its doppelgangers, and those should possess battle prowess at the 6th tier at most. With our forces, we are fully capable of matching them.
At present, the entire Flaming Frost realm possessed roughly 100 6th-tier Heavenly Venerates. Gathered together, that was a force powerful enough to shake even the highest levels of the Genesis world. Against Hysteria's doppelgangers, they were not entering the Void helplessly. They had the strength to fight back. This was the key calculation behind the expedition. Hysteria remained terrifying, but its strongest power was pinned down elsewhere. The primitive dimension had appeared during a rare window when the great monster could not freely turn its full strength against them. Such opportunities did not come often. Lin Xiaoyang and the other supreme experts continued discussing the matter while Ling Han listened from the side. His achievements were already monstrous by any ordinary standard. Yet in a gathering where 6th-tier Heavenly Venerates were deciding how to confront danger within the Void, even Ling Han had not yet reached the level where his opinion carried equal weight. But whether he spoke in that discussion or not made no difference to his decision. He was going. The reason was simple. Heavenly Venerable Seals. If that primitive dimension truly contained more of them, Ling Han would not allow fear of Hysteria to make him retreat. For Ling Han, cultivation had never been a road where one waited safely for fortune to arrive. Greater strength demanded greater risks, and Heavenly Venerable Seals could directly affect the heights he might eventually reach. Faced with such an opportunity, caution was necessary, but retreat was not. The Lin Alliance was far from the only faction stirred into action. Across the Flaming Frost realm, every great force was discussing the same impossible news. A primitive dimension had suddenly appeared inside the Void. Doubt spread everywhere. A dimension existing inside the Void seemed to contradict everything they understood. The Void was filled with the fundamental power of the Genesis world, violent beyond measure. Normally, only 3rd-tier Heavenly Venerates and stronger could move through it safely. Even 2nd-tier Heavenly Venerates risked being swallowed by its terrifying forces. And yet somewhere within that merciless emptiness, there was supposedly an entire dimension. It sounded absurd. But in the martial world, disbelief has rarely stopped cultivators when unimaginable fortune might be waiting on the other side. One force refusing to investigate would merely allow its rivals to seize the opportunity first. Thus, despite their suspicions, the major forces departed one after another. Ling Han brought the Empress and the others with him. Ahead of their group stood Lin Xiaoyang and several other 6th-tier Heavenly Venerates, clearing a path through the Void as they traveled toward the mysterious primitive dimension. The strength of a 6th-tier Heavenly Venerate was simply overwhelming. After little more than a dozen years of traveling through the Void, they found it. They pierced through the dimensional barrier one after another. The sensation was strange, almost as though their bodies were being squeezed through the skin of a gigantic bubble. Then, in a single instant, the murderous turbulence of the Void vanished behind them. Inside this primitive dimension, there was no energy of the Void. Compared with the chaos outside, the world before them was astonishingly peaceful. Of course, that peace was only relative. Energy storms still swept across the barren world in surging waves. Yet these storms were weak enough that even a celestial king could endure them. Celestial King Tyr, however, was the absolute lower limit. An ascending origin tier cultivator entering this place would be torn into pieces almost immediately by the wild currents of energy. Even weaker celestial kings would face considerable danger. Only after reaching roughly the third heaven could one travel here without constantly gambling with death. That explained the desolation. There were no native living beings anywhere. Life normally begins weak and slowly grows stronger. But here, anything below the Celestial King tier could scarcely survive. Unless a creature was somehow born already possessing Celestial King tier strength, the natural chain through which ordinary life developed had nowhere to begin. Ling Han and the others quickly turned from exploration to construction. A massive stronghold began rising from the barren land, becoming the first true foothold belonging to their faction in this strange dimension. This was the perfect moment to seize territory. If they hesitated, the other great forces would divide the valuable regions among themselves, and once every promising area had an owner, taking new territory would no longer be a matter of exploration. It would become a matter of war. The primitive dimension had barely been opened, yet the seeds of future bloodshed were already being planted. Territory itself was not the true prize. The treasures buried beneath that territory were. With Heavenly Venerates personally acting, construction proceeded at a speed ordinary cultivators could hardly imagine. Before long, a colossal base stood firm against the surrounding energy storms. Inside its protection, cultivators of much lower realms could live normally. They simply could not step beyond the defenses without risking their lives. Given enough time, everyone expected special defensive tools capable of resisting the energy storms to be developed as well. Ling Han naturally transferred the Heavenly Venerates of Ling City into the new base. Once their foothold was secure, teams began venturing into the surrounding wilderness, searching for one resource above all others, Heavenly Venerable Stone mines. In the Flaming Frost realm, Heavenly Venerable Stones were pitifully scarce, scattered in tiny quantities across an enormous world. Here, however, the situation was completely different. There were entire veins of Heavenly Venerable Stone, vast deposits large enough to be mined systematically. Their luck was good. Not far from their base, Ling Han's faction discovered a vein suitable for excavation. And now, the reason for building such an enormous protected settlement became obvious. They needed ordinary cultivators. Mining required labor, careful, patient labor performed piece by piece. Could Heavenly Venerates themselves mine the stones? Certainly. But having supreme experts spend their days swinging tools against rock would be an outrageous waste of their time. More importantly, Heavenly Venerable Stone possessed a strange contradiction. It could block the divine sense of a Heavenly Venerate, yet the stone itself was remarkably fragile. If a Heavenly Venerate carelessly unleashed too much strength while excavating, an entire ore vein could collapse with a single thunderous impact. Divine metal buried inside could be shattered. Celestial King tier great herbs could be destroyed. Even precious Heavenly Venerable Seals might be ruined before anyone ever laid eyes upon them. Brute strength, therefore, was almost useless here. The stronger the miner, the more dangerous carelessness became. In a world dominated by beings who could shatter mountains, the treasures beneath these mines demanded the delicacy of mortal craftsmen. Thus, enormous numbers of workers entered the protected bases and began carefully extracting the raw stones, almost exactly as mortals would mine ordinary ore. Meanwhile, every major faction continued expanding its territorial claims. For the moment, the primitive dimension was vast enough that they did not have to clash. But everyone understood what would happen eventually. The unclaimed territory would shrink, Accessible ore veins would become fewer, and once that day came, the remaining mines would become battlefields. For now, however, the mining continued. Stone after stone was excavated and delivered to Ling Han, Zhou Heng, and the others. They began cutting them open, searching for whatever secrets had been sealed inside through immeasurable ages. The result was, for the most part, painfully disappointing. Inside most Heavenly Venerable Stones, there was nothing but more stone. Still, their efforts were not completely fruitless. Eventually, one raw stone revealed the seed of a celestial medicine, and not an ordinary one. This ancient medicinal treasure had been tempered by the fundamental power of heaven and earth itself. Its effects were powerful enough to benefit even Heavenly Venerates. That alone made the discovery extraordinary. In the Flaming Frost realm, ordinary celestial medicines existed within the framework of regulations, while Heavenly Venerates had already stepped beyond those regulations. Such medicines could therefore offer them little meaningful assistance. But the great herbs buried within these stones were different. They had already died countless ages ago. During the endless passage of time that followed, their remains absorbed an ocean of fundamental power. Death, time, and the fundamental forces of the Genesis world had transformed them into something new. Great herbs capable of affecting Heavenly Venerates themselves. Even Ling Han, Zhou Heng, and the others were stunned by the discovery. Unfortunately, astonishment did not mean abundance. They cut open tens of thousands of raw stones before obtaining a single great herb of this level. Heavenly Venerable Seals were rarer still. On average, roughly 1 stone in 1,000,000 contained one. Those odds revealed the true nature of the treasure hunt. A mountain of raw stone could yield almost nothing, while a single unremarkable piece might contain something capable of changing a Heavenly Venerate's future. Every cut carried the possibility of either emptiness or overwhelming fortune. As the years passed and more stones were opened, experience slowly accumulated. A pattern emerged. The closer the excavation approached the core of an ore vein, the greater the likelihood of finding valuable objects. The production rate of supreme medicines and Heavenly Venerable Seals could rise several times over. Of course, several times, a pitifully low probability was still a pitifully low probability. And great herbs and Heavenly Venerable Seals were not the only treasures hidden within the stone. Divine metal appeared as well. Even devouring metal could occasionally be found. The primitive dimension was beginning to resemble a colossal treasure vault buried within the void. But the richer the treasure vault appeared, the heavier the shadow hanging over everyone became. At present, every faction had mines, everyone was prosperous. There was enough wealth to keep swords inside their sheaths. But mines were not infinite. Once the veins already under their control were completely exhausted, what would happen when several mighty factions set their eyes upon the same remaining deposit? Ling Han asked himself that very question. And when he searched his own heart, he knew the answer. He would not retreat. For the sake of such minds, even Ling Han was willing to contend with others until the very end. And that realization mattered. Ling Han was hardly the most blindly greedy cultivator in existence. If even he considered these mines worth fighting for, then the future conflict among the great powers was not merely possible. It was almost inevitable. Yet that future did not arrive immediately. Several 100 million years passed in relative peace. During those long ages, something unexpected quietly flourished within the primitive dimension. An entire industry centered on the buying and selling of Heavenly Venerable Stone. The logic was simple. The probability of finding treasure inside the stones was miserably low. Rather than cut open vast reserves themselves and risk receiving nothing, some factions decided to sell the raw stones directly. And Heavenly Venerable Stone possessed the perfect characteristic for such a trade. Heavenly Venerate Divine Sense could not penetrate it. No buyer could simply inspect the inside before paying. Every purchase became a wager. One could spend an astonishing fortune, split the stone apart, and discover nothing. Or one could open a single piece and uncover a treasure whose value dwarfed the price paid. The raw stone trade shifted the risk from the seller to the buyer. Mining and selling offered stable profit. Cutting the stones offered ruin or sudden fortune. It was cultivation wealth transformed into a game of judgment, nerve, and probability. As more factions recognized this advantage, they began imitating the first sellers. Little by little, what had begun as a practical way to dispose of reserves expanded into a massive market. Naturally, ordinary starstones were nowhere near valuable enough to purchase these raw stones. The accepted currency became divine metal. Divine metal might have little direct use to heavenly venerates in battle, but it remained necessary for forging heavenly venerate tools. That practical value allowed it to serve as a stable medium of exchange. Then, as fortunes rose and fell across countless transactions, another change appeared. People began studying the raw stones themselves. Could certain stones be more likely to contain treasures? Could their external patterns reveal what lay hidden inside? Through examining the veined patterns on the stones, and judging how long each piece had taken to form, cultivators discovered that the probability of identifying valuable raw stones could indeed be increased. The implications were enormous. If someone could consistently distinguish treasure-bearing stones from worthless ones, then every visit to the market could become another harvest. Wealth would accumulate again and again. With that wealth came medicines, materials, Heavenly Venerable Seals, and opportunities. Cultivation and battle prowess could rise at a terrifying rate. This was no longer merely gambling on stones. Whoever truly mastered the secrets of selecting raw stone could seize an advantage that multiplied itself. In a realm where every increase in strength demanded staggering resources, such knowledge could become a weapon every bit as valuable as a supreme cultivation technique. And perhaps that is the most dangerous thing about this new age. The primitive dimension had first tempted the great forces with mines. Then the mines created wealth. Wealth created competition. Now even knowledge itself was becoming something worth fighting over. Under such circumstances, Ling Han could hardly remain indifferent. He gathered his focus and threw himself eagerly into studying this newly emerging field, the secrets hidden within Heavenly Venerable Stone.